Welcome, everybody. We're going to get started. My name is Molly. I am Development Manager with Democracy for America, and I'm excited to introduce you all, if you haven't already met them, our CEO, Yvette Simpson, and our Political Director, Chris Scott, who will give an introduction for Mr. Larry Krasner.
Hey, everyone. I just want to make sure everybody's on mute. And if you haven't yet, go ahead and put in the chat your name and where you're joining us from. We're going to continue to let people in as we go. I'm Yvette Simpson, CEO of Democracy for America. I've been in this role since January 2019. Before that, I served as the federal elections manager for DFA in 2018, working on our congressional races in the year that we took the House. Ushering in the most progressive and most diverse coalition of Congress members in America's history. What a great year. And every year that I get to work for DFA has been a great year. The man I'm going to introduce after Chris talks needs no introduction, although I think Chris is probably going to do a more in-depth introduction. But Larry Krasner has been a part of the DFA family from day one. DFA is not new to the work of criminal justice reform, even though we are rebranding under the banner of established justice. Larry Krasner is one of the DAs who has done the work, who has been out front, who has not been afraid to take on all the battles with all of the organizations. He'll talk about some of the organizations that he loves the most to battle. And when we think about what we've encountered over the last few years, how criminal justice reform has become the center point of American conversation, his book, which we're going to be talking about today, I hope y'all have your copy, couldn't be more timely. I think when we think about what happened over the last year, our support of AG Keith Ellison, who is also a day one DFA'er, and the work that people like Larry and Keith do across the country to make sure, one, that we don't conflate safety, the need for safety with the need to discriminate or over punish a certain population of people or any people. And so we're really excited to have this conversation with you today, Larry, and I know Chris is going to introduce himself and do a bit of an introduction. The way this is going to play is we're going to have a couple pre-questions for our special guests. And then if you have questions, we'll field those questions once we're done with the early questions. If you all have your book, we might have a little time for everybody to get a little, little photo of the book. Chris, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. My name is Chris Scott, Chief Political Officer for Democracy for America. I took over this role in May of this year. Just excited to be here. But less about me. Let's talk about DA Krasner. You cannot talk about a progressive prosecutor and think of a face of a progressive prosecutor without thinking of Larry Krasner in the first place. Whether or not we're talking about greater police accountability, whether or not we're talking about ending cash bail for nonviolent offenses, DA Krasner has been a leader in really spearheading a lot of those efforts. I think of even Prosecutor Kim Foxx in Chicago when I worked for her, really looking at a lot of the reforms that Larry Krasner started doing in 2018. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to the DA, but also just say thank you for your tireless and your relentless effort when it comes to actually reforming our criminal justice system and making it actually focus on the justice side of its name.
I think you're muted.
You were lucky when I was muted. Now you have to listen. So number one, thank you. That was really kind. I really appreciate those supportive and kind words coming from Yvette and Chris. As you may know, not everybody is supportive of, let's just say, criminal justice reform or progressives or DFA. Not everybody, but they're wrong and we're right. So, and we shouldn't forget that because we are actually right. We do have the facts and we do have the truth, and we haven't forgotten our moral compass, and we are right. So let's talk about how right we are, because I think it's important. I understand the mission of DFA is much bigger than criminal justice reform. So I want to actually talk about two things, and I want to give you plenty of time to ask questions. I can stay late. I got permission. I can stay late. So please don't feel like you got to rush through. I know most of you have more important things to do with your life than this, but I will hang around for extra questions if that is consistent with what DFA wants to do. Number one, I get too much credit. Kim Foxx is one of my heroes. Kim Foxx is a badass. Make no mistake. Kim Foxx was in office before I was. She walked me around while I was getting ready to get into office because people at a national level said, go see that one. They were right. She was someone to see. And as soon as I got into office, I stole some of her policies. If she's looking at ours, then I am honored. And I just want to say this is all open source. This is not about people who are elected to these positions. This is, in fact, a grassroots movement for criminal justice reform. And as far as I'm concerned, you know, Kim Foxx, Kim Gardner, who also got there before me and has taken more punches than I have, Aramis Ayala, who became the progressive chief in Orlando and was treated terribly and is now on her way to the U.S. House. And I hope we'll all support her in that because she belongs there. These are all people who got there before me. They stuck their chins out. They took hits. Marilyn Mosby in Baltimore. I mean, these are some pretty amazing people. Gascon, back when George Gascon, when he was the DA in San Francisco before he became what he is now, which is the chief prosecutor in the largest criminal justice jurisdiction in the United States, Los Angeles. These are all people who got there before me. They did amazing work before me. And I guess in some ways I've been the beneficiary of my own foolhardiness, like deciding to write a book. That's pretty foolhardy. And also allowing a bunch of people to follow me with cameras in the DA's office with no financial benefit and no editorial control. Yes, it means you are crazy, and that's what I did. But I did it for a reason, and the reason is real. And that is that people should know that ordinary people can get elected to office. Outsiders to politics can get elected to office. And there is a code for how you do that. It's one of the things I write about in the book. The book, I mean, some people call it a memoir, but the truth is, the main topics in the book are how the ideas I have about criminal justice reform got formed over a childhood and then a 30-year career in criminal court. And number two, how outsiders win office. And needless to say, with the political views that many of us have, we are not necessarily mainstream centrist Democrats. We have a view that is not readily embraced by the leadership of our party. So it's important that we know how to do it. Those are some of the main topics in that book. I'd love to talk about that. And I will also propose for you something I think is important to discuss, which is whether criminal justice reform is actually what is going to save democracy in the United States. Ask me, and I'll tell you why I think that, because I do think that. I believe that is absolutely true. And I think it's something we all better figure out before 2022, because the vitality, the hope of democracy is absolutely at stake, and it will be determined most likely in 2022. And it's something that I'm convinced we can win. The right people, the right side can win this, but we have to recognize what it takes to bring out people who are disenchanted with our centrist democratic politics, to bring out people who have been neglected, abused, maligned, mistreated by our politics. And what that means is you have to go to the issues that they understand. You have to go to the boot that is on their neck, and you have to say that's a boot, and that should come off of the neck. And when you do that, people will get up and they will go to a place they haven't been in a while, which is the polls, and they will vote. So I'm looking forward to talking to you about all of that. And now I will comply with the schedule before me, and I will stop speaking before 5 minutes.
You can go on and on and on if you like. We are here to hear you. That is why everyone is here. We are recording this. We had about 200 people who RSVP for this event. We're letting them in slowly, but we also want to make sure we record because I'm sure lots of people want to hear what you have to say. I like where you started, so let's start there. And this was one of the conversations that Chris and I had as we talked about rebranding our criminal justice reform work. One, because it's such a long title. And two, because we think established justice, which is in our Constitution, is, I think, a little bit more of where our heart's cry is around the criminal justice conversation. We did talk about, when we did this work, around the juxtaposition and the interconnection of criminal justice reform work on our justice system and democracy. So we'd love to hear you expound on your thoughts about that, since that is the issue that most people are most concerned about today, the threat to our democracy.
Sure. Thank you for letting me do that. I get all fired up. I may fall out of my chair. We'll see. So
But we do have democracy in our name, as you know, Larry. So it's kind of the work that's near and dear to our heart.
I hear you. I hear you. And democracy is near and dear to me too. Apparently not the party of insurrection, but it is near and dear to me. So so here's the thing. Let me just give you the micro example. In 2017, I had never run for anything. And I was running as an outsider candidate, dubbed immediately as a quote unicorn, unquote, a never win, a laughable candidate, because I was saying, no, we don't need to arrest more people, lock up more people, and give them longer sentences. We need to do the opposite. We need to get people out of jail. That was part of my announcement when I ran. And what happened was we won, but we won with 50,000 unexpected votes turning out. According to every expert we knew, 50,000 extra votes turned out in a very, very low turnout cycle. What happens in Philly is the DA is essentially the top of the ticket in the off-year election, you know, relatively speaking, who cares? So there were cycles when there was only 9% or 12% of the vote that actually turned out. When we ran, that changed. We got 50,000 votes. This is 6 months after Donald Trump has won the state of Pennsylvania by 40,000 votes. 40,000 votes statewide determined Pennsylvania, but we pulled 50,000 unexpected votes out of Philadelphia. And everybody said, wow, that's amazing. That's great. That's really cool. But it was Donald Trump. It was a reaction to Donald Trump. Everybody's panicking. They're all, you know, they're running for the exit doors. They would vote for you or, you know, a Cocker Spaniel. They're all running. And I was kind of like, well, as long as they're voting for me, I don't care. Cocker Spaniels are okay too. We then go to the general election. There is no suspense for a general election in 2017 in Philadelphia. 7 out of every 8 people are Democrats, right? No suspense, except even more extra votes turned out. And we were even farther from the election of the great Satan, Donald Trump, right? So, okay, maybe it's spillover from Trump. Here comes the reelect. And we just had our primary reelection in May. All the national experts, all of our friends, we're talking people who run progressive campaigns all over the country all the time, said, Krasner, they ain't turning out. Joe Biden won. They're not turning out. They're not turning out. Guess what? Even more votes turned out. I think we were at like 85,000 extra votes in 2017 in the general. It was even more extra votes that turned out here, where there was very little suspense. I was running against one candidate. He was an awful candidate. I mean, it didn't make any sense, but all these people came out. And when you dug in deeper, you saw an amazing thing. We are having in Philadelphia and basically every big city in the United States, a terrible spike in gun violence. We are not having a terrible spike in violence. That's not true. Violent crime is actually down and has been for a couple of years in all these cities. And we are not having a spike of crime. That's also not true. Crime has been down for at least a couple of years in almost all these cities, but there's a terrible spike in gun violence that has occurred during the pandemic, including in Philadelphia. We won the primary in May of this year with 66.7% of the vote. It was a stunning reelect with a very surprisingly large number of people turning out. The entire attack on our campaign was Krasner's killing people. He's manufacturing guns and giving them out from under his bed. He's teaching people how to shoot. That was the entire campaign against me. If you looked at the neighborhoods in Philadelphia that have had the worst problems with shootings, where there has actually been blood in the street on a regular basis, and it was the blood of teenagers. When you look at those traumatized areas where you would expect a message like that to have some traction, we didn't get 67% of the vote. We got 85% of the vote. As we did polling during the campaign, there was full buy-in on the idea that you don't give more money to police. Only 15% of Philadelphians said give more money to police to solve this. More than 50%, 85% said it was something else. And more than 50% said it was investment in community-based and nonprofit programs that were disconnected from law enforcement. That's what more than 50% of the city of Philadelphia had to say on the topic in the middle of a crisis of homicides by shooting and non-fatal shootings. Okay, that's the reality of what's going on. So this invites a very interesting theory because I am a novice and outsider politician, but I looked at what a very experienced career politician did in Philly to get Joe Biden elected. And it was pretty clever. And that was when I was not running. What she did is she put a ballot measure up that was essentially the city of Philadelphia says police should not engage in illegal stop and frisk. I mean, I support that and I supported it, but it has no legal impact whatsoever. Let us understand, police weren't supposed to do illegal stop and frisk before that because it's illegal. That's how the law works. The city of Philadelphia can say, really don't do it, but they haven't said anything new. So why did she do it when she knew it had no legal effect? Why did she go to that trouble? She did it to make Joe Biden win. Because by putting on the ballot an issue around criminal justice reform, not necessarily even a candidate, but an issue around criminal justice reform, everybody who had been stopped and seen their friends stopped multiple times at a bus stop for doing nothing more than coming home from a public school and being Black, everybody who had been in that position said, yeah, I'm voting. I'm voting. Might or might not care for Joe Biden. Certainly don't like Donald Trump, but I'm voting because I do not want to have that happen to me or my children or my uncles or anybody else again, right? So I say that to say, having a centrist Democratic Party fight one more time for Reagan Democrats, that's not what this is about. What this is about is turning out reluctant and unlikely voters. We already got Joe Biden. Joe Biden and that crew will already have some appeal with those swing voters. The much, much bigger issue, the one the Democratic Party has neglected forever. And it's something I talk about in that book in terms of the history of Philadelphia. And they've neglected it in many instances for their own incumbency because elected officials, including elected officials who are jockeying diverse voters, want the voters they can control because they want to stay in office and they don't always want new voters. What we need is new voters. And I guarantee you that if what you bring out is people who have strong feelings about criminal justice because they have been affected by it directly or indirectly, I guarantee you 9 out of 10 of those people, or maybe 19 out of 20, are going to be Democrats. They are going to lean towards progressive Democrats, and that will be Black people. It will be people of color. It will be all kinds of people of goodwill, and it will be young people because Bernie Sanders' strong appeal to the youth vote among Democrats is very, very clear and was very, very clear. That's what you're going to bring out. So that is why I say, if we were in 2022 to have ballot measures, or depending on the state, laws, or to have a sheriff candidate, or to have a district attorney candidate, or to have people running for legislative offices who say, I will end cash bail, I will end the death penalty, I will impose a system of accountability for police where if they are disciplined or fired from one department, they can't just hop to the next one over because there will be a database. If we have candidates who do that, then you will turn out the vote and you will turn it out all over the country. The key is to get criminal justice reform on the ballot in all of these jurisdictions in some way or another. Even if it's a little goofy, as happened in Philly, where we had to say one more time that something illegal is still illegal. If it works, do it. Heaven knows that Republicans do things that work that are strictly illegal. Let's do stuff that works that's legal. And that means putting this stuff on the ballot. So that is the point I was getting at and have now beaten to death.
Look, you could go all day. You hit on a couple of good points. One of the things when you talk about criminal justice reform, it's such a broad scope of how many things does it actually touch. What do you feel like is the biggest thing that actually plagues criminal justice? And obviously, it's hard to just go to one thing, but is there one that you feel like is most prominent that is plaguing the criminal justice system right now?
Well, I don't think that there is any question that our criminal justice system has always picked on poor people. It has always picked on Black and brown people. In different ways at different times, it has picked on women. I don't think there's any question that it is a reflection, and sometimes a much uglier reflection, of our culture. If you're talking about the greatest harm it has done, mass incarceration, in my mind, is easily the greatest harm it has done, because the ripple effects of mass incarceration are so utterly devastating that they have created this movement. Let me give you the negative of that photograph, okay? So my contention is the reason that you have a grassroots movement for criminal justice reform is because the weight of mass incarceration has been so crushing and so harmful, not just to the people who were locked up and taken from their families, but to all of us, that its popularity is growing, is real, and is becoming extreme. How extreme? 2 years ago, before George Floyd, there were 10% of the US population who had a progressive prosecutor making criminal justice decisions in their jurisdiction. So you had progressive prosecutors for about 35 million people. That was 2 years ago. If you went back 10 or 15 years, that number was zero. So we went from basically zero to about 35 million people 2 years ago, having progressive prosecutors who got there as outsiders, who often had to fight the centrist party, who are still fighting a centrist press. We had them get there. The number now is not 35 million, it is 70 million. We have gone from 10% of the US having elected and reelected a progressive prosecutor to 20.1%. And not only are people like Marilyn Mosby and Kim Fox and Kim Gardner and me getting reelected, but we are getting reelected by double-digit amounts, and by amounts that almost seem to be increasing over time. What I am saying here is that the crushing weight of mass incarceration has created such a sweeping and general movement for criminal justice reform at the grassroots among many, many different kinds of people at this time, that we are arguably the most successful political party in the United States by far. Neither the Democratic nor the Republican Party, nor any outside party, including one of my favorites, the Working Family Party, none of them can claim these kinds of gains, these kinds of pickups. You're dealing with, what I think many of us view as a pathetic stalemate, gridlock, deliberate gridlock, obstructionism. And yet what we see is in the space of 2 years, you have picked up essentially twice the influence, double the number of, when they start talking about how powerful Donald Trump is, what do they talk about? They're talking about 80 million people or something, 80 million people who voted for the devil. That's basically what they're talking about. I'm talking to you right now about 70 million people living in jurisdictions who threw out more traditional prosecutors with all their influence, power, and advantage to put progressive prosecutors in. And those are in big jurisdictions. They are, Brooklyn, Eric Gonzalez. It is Chicago. It is Los Angeles. It's Philadelphia. It's Baltimore. These are big jurisdictions. So the actual influence is even more than 20% of the population, because my jurisdiction will have about 40,000 cases in a year, but some of these smaller jurisdictions will have 100, right? So the influence is even more outsized. That insane acceleration of victory, the fact that we've gone from essentially one progressive prosecutor in Georgia to now about 8 or 9. Thank you, Stacey Abrams. And this is true. I just got back from meeting with a lot of those wonderful folks, and some of them are in more rural jurisdictions. We are seeing transformational change occurring at the ballot box in these jurisdictions, and it is coming from the terrible, terrible, terrible things that mass incarceration has done. We're even at the point, now you're really going to get sick to your stomach, but I'll tell you anyway, we're at the point where the Federalist Society wants me to come talk to them. Make no mistake, I am not even a little bit of a fan of the Federalist Society, but I cannot miss the opportunity to jump in that volcano. And why? I think you know why. Because strangely enough, a lot of people on the right who don't believe in big government see mass incarceration as big government. And a lot of people on the right who view themselves as libertarians don't think it's really libertarian to be the most incarcerated country in the world, right? It's even starting to sink in with some people who you would consider to be the arch enemies of pretty much everything else you believe. When the Koch brothers are with me on mass incarceration, but they're also destroying the earth, that makes me feel funny. But it also means it's also a measure of what our political progress looks like. We're not just taking progressives. We're doing really well with centrist people, and we are starting to do well even with reasonable Republicans and some unreasonable conservatives. This is a massive movement, and it is coming, in my opinion, directly from the tremendous harm and destruction that has been done by wasting all this money on mass incarceration.
So my question is, how do we reconcile, and you talked about the media and the role that they play, and then our own party, how do we reconcile the very damaging messaging, right? That police need more protection. They need more money. We need to, we need to make sure we're safe, and police are the answer. That defund the police somehow is the messaging is bad. It's wrong. The fact that we can't be safe without targeting, profiling, murdering a certain part of our population. How do we reconcile the messages that are going out versus the very reality that you just talked about? That this movement is growing and that more people are connecting to it.
It's a great question. So we have a few antidotes. So one of the things that has happened in criminal justice for a long time is it has been completely unscientific. It has been devoid of data for the most part, and prosecutors have run their offices like black boxes, meaning they wouldn't give out information because they didn't want people to know. They were well aware that they were very, very disproportionately locking up Black and brown people, but that didn't sound like a good campaign theme for the next election, so they kept it quiet. We have an answer. Our answer is called the truth. It is called data. It is called facts. It is telling the truth. And there is a combination of, there are professional journalists who are in the right camp, not most of them. There are academics who have done some amazing stuff. That's important. We need to put it out. And I'll just give you an example. The battle cry of the campaign against me, the campaign across the country, has been progressive prosecutors have out of control crime. Lie. Crime not out of control. They have out of control violent crime. Lie. Violent crime not out of control. Progressive prosecutors are making gun crime go crazy. Lie. There is an article by John Pfaff, who is, no screaming lefty, but he is an economist and a professor of law at Fordham University. Highly respected guy, wrote a very important book on mass incarceration called Locked In, who did a study. He took all of the top 50 cities and he looked to see what was going on with gun violence, ranked them all, and then looked to see who the prosecutors were. And what does that study show us? It shows us that the average increase in gun violence in the 50 top cities last year was 42%. The Wild West of Philly was 40%, so a little bit less than average bad. Some cities were at 85%, 102% increases in gun violence. Other cities were wiping their brows because they were, flat, or they were at only a 20% increase. They were doing better. But the point is, as you look down the list, there was absolutely no correspondence whatsoever between higher levels of gun violence and progressive prosecutors. None whatsoever. That's the truth. And that's the way we defeat this, is they don't have studies because they make it up. Donald Trump is the master of making it up. We got studies, and we can get studies. I'm the beneficiary of a data lab, 15 people in the DA's office that is not tax funded. It is grant funded. We need to use our capacity to gather data. We need to feed that to journalists, and that helps us with the mainstream press. But the mainstream press is obviously shrinking. The reality is that a lot of the people we need to turn out and get to come to vote are on Instagram. Let's get real. If Donald Trump's doing something better than us, then we're not even trying. And he's been very, very good at using social media, even though he's very, very bad at everything else. He's been very, very good at doing that. That's something that we can do better, and we must do better. So, increasingly, my office is doing what we were not very good at in the last term. It is social media in campaigns. It's social media in terms of disseminating the message. It allows a level of connection that is increasingly expected by younger generations. And it allows us to get out our message, in the same way that Donald Trump went past what he viewed as the filter of mainstream journalism. In fact, they were just holding him accountable and telling the truth, but he viewed them as a filter. So he went around them with social media. We have to not only sell the truth through mainstream media, but we have to sell the truth through social media. And to the extent that we can do that, we can see really remarkable things in terms of low dollar fundraising, in terms of turning out the vote, in terms of really grasping what's happening. Now, let me also say this, because it seems very daunting. I mean, a lot of people who were watching my campaign They're like me. I'm 60 years old. So they're reading the paper, and the paper saying, oh my goodness, looks like Waterloo for Krasner. He's going down in flames. Oh my goodness, somebody got shot yesterday. That's it. There's never been shootings in Philly before. This is over. Did the same exact thing to Kim Foxx when she ran. Did the same exact thing to Gascon when he's running to take over Los Angeles. And then as soon as we all won big, the mainstream press got really quiet. They were all built up for that story. I mean, I could even tell you a funny one about the victory party. I have to. It's just too fun. So 8 o'clock, we're showing up for a victory party during a pandemic, and therefore it is a limited number of people. It is socially distanced. And in the back, some of our local journalists who are less enlightened than they could be, let me put it that way, they're in the back and they've got little grins on their faces. And as my campaign manager comes in and my comms people come in, they're saying things like, party's a little sparse, isn't it? Don't see too many, giggle, giggle, giggle. They're doing this nonsense. And then the results start coming in. 57% for Krasner, 59%, 61% for Krasner. XYZ ward just came in at 80% for Krasner. So you can kind of see like the life draining from them as this is going on. And so we come down, this is the 8 o'clock closing time, 8 o'clock party start. We come down and announce our victory at 11 o'clock. They go crazy because the AP hasn't called it yet, right? AP called it in my favor 9 minutes later, but they go crazy. You know, why are they living in this silo? It really wasn't hard to walk down the street and talk to people in high turnout or low turnout neighborhoods and say, what do you think of the Fraternal Order of Police, the local police union, Hayton Krasner? What do you think? You think he's causing all these homicides? I mean, we did our polling. We knew what our polling said. They could have done all of that, but they did not do it. They were in their silos to such an extent, talking to their usual sources in the police department or their usual sources in professional politics, centrist professional politics, that they had it all figured out, and they had nothing at all figured out. That was of great delight to me, by the way. So, that's where we are. We have to go to the people. The institutions are with us a little bit. They are not with us enough yet. I mean, for example, the major paper in Philly has come around. They came around from hating me, not endorsing me, beating me up constantly, to twice endorsing me with little digs, but that's okay. I'll take some digs. I deserve some digs. So we do see some transformation, but we're still up against a judiciary that doesn't always want to do it. We're still up against, city councils and mayors who sometimes want to cut our budget when they cannot stop giving more money to, a police department that is the 4th largest in the United States, and we're the 6th largest city. So it's an oversized police department. Like, we're still up against the institutions, but oh my goodness, do we have the people? And that's where we have to go. We have to remain connected to people. That is social media, that is banging doors, that is mass texting, that is calling people, we have to do all of that. But I am here to tell you that if we do that, there is another thing. We got to pick the right candidates. I'll get to that. But if we do that, I'm telling you right now, 2022 will not be a bad year. We are not looking at Donald Trump for a second term. We are not looking at the end of democracy. We have to turn out so many votes that, the minority party, which is trying to rule by eliminating our voters, knock them out of the water. I mean, we really only have one move left. And our move is to knock those people out of office, to take things over, and then we will save our democracy, and we'll do it through criminal justice reform. I'll talk about picking candidates later. I think you have a question about that probably. So
I have one more question. So when you're talking about a lot of these changes that progressive prosecutors are getting done, and the culture shift that we're seeing across the country, still there is, as you just said, a lot of resistance to that. So what has, at least for you, been the most difficult part of creating that cultural change, even within the prosecutor office? Like you said, a lot of it has been very old guard heavy beforehand. So can you talk a little bit about how do you actually get that culture shift done to actually bring the changes that you're trying to get done?
So my favorite story about this is one that I think Chris Stone told me a while ago, which is about how Nelson Mandela comes in to be the leader of South Africa. And in South Africa, they had a National Prosecutors Bureau, which did all the prosecution all over the country. They were not people who could simply be turned out and fired. And there needed to be a leader. So Nelson Mandela picked a man, a lawyer, who had done 3 years in custody.
Where's that person going? Must be cars.
Hi, if anybody's not muted, I would appreciate it. So anyway, Nelson puts a person as chief prosecutor who did 3 years in jail for what? For celebrating the birthday of Nelson Mandela. How funny is this, right? But this guy has to actually try to change the culture of all the people who sent him to jail and who sent Nelson Mandela to jail, and he can't fire them. This is a tough place to be. Change does not happen overnight. I didn't have it that bad for many reasons, including Philly's not South Africa, and also I could fire people, but it is still a struggle, and we are not there yet. One of the first things you do is you fire some people, because some of these people should be fired, simply put. The next thing that you have to do is make recruiting your absolute top priority, and we did that. And we did it by doing something that many prosecutors' offices don't do, which is going outside your local area. Instead of just going to the feeder schools that represented, where the leadership had gone themselves. There's usually a local law school that is predominant. We made a decision to not only do the Philadelphia schools, but to go to every one of the 6 remaining HBCU law schools and to go to all the top 20 ranked schools. And then also, to do all of the different public service or diversity forums that happen around the country where people go to interview with multiple employers, right? We did that. We ended up hiring amazingly talented people, much, much more diverse groups of people, which is important in a city where the population is 40% white and the population of prosecutors was 80% white when I first came in there, right? You do that for a year, you start to see a little bit of a shift. You do it for 2 years, there's more shift. 3 years, even more shift, because people don't stay in prosecutors' offices their whole lives. On average, they're going to say 5 to 10 years, then they'll go on and do other things, either as private attorneys or whatever it may be, running nonprofits, whatever it may be. So at this point in the office, we have actually hired most of the 300 attorneys who are in the office. Has that solved our problem? No. Certainly things have gotten a lot better. We've had time to pass some really good policies in the office. We try to impose them, but the real struggle we've had, the biggest struggle, is that you cannot make people supervisors who have no experience, and you should not. So yes, we could poach some people from the public defender's office who had the ability to be supervisors and had a lot of experience and could transfer it. We did that. But you really can't do that for every supervisory position. You're going to have to look around at the bench of people who were hired by the prior administration, trained, evaluated by the prior administration. You're going to have to take some of the old guard, as they put it. And I do not mean old people, by the way. What I'm speaking of specifically is a reference to the French Revolution. But let me not go on and on about that, because people are suing me for stupid stuff. You're going to have to take some of the old guard, and you're going to have to make them supervisors until you have all the personnel you need. That has been the struggle. The struggle has been that not all of our supervisors are fully on board. Even when they're following the rules, their instincts go a different direction. There are literally hundreds of decisions that are often made in the prosecution of a single criminal case. Do we charge it or not? Do we charge it with this one of 13 charges or not? Do we pursue a jury trial or not, et cetera? Should we divert it? Should we try to get a conviction? Do we want a misdemeanor? How much? All these decisions are meaningful. And the problem is when you take people who were comfortable in apartheid and you say, welcome to the new South Africa. Let's all make discretionary decisions wisely. They think in a way that is different. And by different, I don't mean new. I mean, they think in a way that needs to be changed. So that has been a challenge. How do you wrap your arms around it? One of the ways you do is data. You keep macro data. You don't have to get every case just right. You never will. But if you see things like this, if you see that you have cut the future years of jail and prison in half compared to what used to be produced, then you are getting somewhere. Maybe there probably is more to do. I think there is. Maybe some of those supervisors got to go. But you have to not only look at the individual situation, the case that went wrong, the supervisor who did the wrong thing for a couple months. You have to look at the big picture, and I am proud and happy to tell you that even with all of that struggle, even with all of our efforts to change culture, even though it feels like we're walking in molasses. The reality is that we've cut mass incarceration, in other words, future incarceration, in half. We've cut mass supervision, in other words, excessive probation and parole, by 2/3. We have reduced the number of juveniles who are in placements away from their home. And many of those placements were snake pits. They cost a fortune. The results in terms of future crimes, but also in terms of education were terrible. We have cut that number from over 600 Philadelphia children to a little over 100 Philadelphia children. That is an 80% reduction, right? These are big changes, and they're big changes that all happened before the pandemic even hit. We were able to do this in about 27 months. So culture not changed completely, no. Most social justice movements take decades. They don't take days. And so we have to, on the one hand, keep driving, but we also have to have a measure of patience, because this monster was built in about 4 decades, and we have to dismantle a monster.
Yeah. You and all the other progressive prosecutors, and the list includes all of those that we love, all of our DFA, amazing prosecutors who are against all odds, really doing great work. The battles that we have had and our candidates have had with the National Police Association and the police associations across the country. And I think about Rachel Rollins' battle when we first got her, helped her get elected, Wesley Bell, whose own staff tried to join the police union, it's lawsuits from police unions and the pushback that you often get. Just want to say thank you for, I don't think we talk enough about that daily battle that you often have in that work. But I did want to shift to one thing that is in the book that you talk quite a bit about, and that I think is an important conversation. It's a growing conversation about the abolishment of the death penalty. So I would love for you to reflect on that a little bit for the audience. And for those who don't have the book yet, we do have a link in the chat. If you want to get the book, please get the book. And we have that available as well through our book club. If you're not a member of our book club, we'll have a link for that as well. Make sure you get the book. But you talk about the death penalty quite a bit, and there's a growing movement, I think, and a conversation about what it would look like to abolish the death penalty in this country.
Yeah, I'm delighted to talk about that. By the way, for those of you familiar with the history of the Civil War, you remember they used to do surgery without anesthesia. Well, if you're reading my book, I just suggest you find a piece of wood to bite on or something like that. You will get past the pain and of a novice effort, and hopefully you'll find some stories that are pretty interesting, because the truth is, in all of this tragedy and sadness, there's a lot of things that they're just plain funny. I mean, that is just the reality of being in a criminal courthouse and seeing the wonderful and terrible things that are happening every day. So the death penalty is something I wrote about at length. I feel very passionately about it. I was actually on a death penalty jury when I was 23 years old, before I went to law school. A year after getting out of college, I was working as a carpenter, and I tell that story. And part of the moral of that story is that when I went in the back to deliberate in a case where guilt was very clear on a terrible murder, rape, arson of an elderly woman, when we went in the back to deliberate, there was blatant racism. There was tremendous mental illness that was so bad, it required the removal of one of the jurors during deliberations, which almost never, ever happens. What I learned in that process was in many ways encouraging, because there is a strength to a jury, and that strength is you have so many minds that work differently working together. But there was tremendous imperfection, as there always has been with the death penalty. It is the ultimate penalty. It is irreversible, and it is as imperfect as people are, and people are mighty imperfect. We have executed innocent people in the United States of America, and you can never reverse that. The good news, I then go on to talk about a number of cases in which I was the defense attorney that were death penalty matters, and the experiences I had in that regard, some of them pretty appalling. Thank goodness the death penalty was never successful in the cases I did. But I go on to talk about that. And of course, now I wear a very different hat. I sit around a table surrounded by other members of the committee that considers whether or not to pursue the death penalty. It is a process, and we follow that process. We saw what happened to Aramis Ayala in Orlando. And for those of you who may not know this bit of history, she came out and she was very bold and said, I will not pursue the death penalty. And that was seized upon by some very cynical people in Florida as an excuse not to let her handle cases involving the death penalty. They basically said, oh, so you're not making judgments in individual cases. Well, if you're not making judgments in individual cases, then you're not exercising your discretion. And if you're not exercising your discretion, we will take those cases away. That's what happened to Aramis. It was disgusting. She was courageous, and it still offends me. But what we do is a little bit different. We have a committee. The committee considers the situations. The committee makes recommendations to me, not only about new cases and whether we should pursue the death penalty, but also about cases where the death penalty was imposed in the past, cases that are on appeal in some fashion, 30 years later, 20 years later, 10 years later. I can tell you that in 3+ years, we have never pursued the death penalty, either in an appellate posture or in a new case. I can tell you that in the cases where the prior administration filed a notice that they would pursue the death penalty, we did not do that, even though it was an obvious political setup to make us do it. And we consider every case carefully, and we make those decisions carefully. But I understand fully how truly imperfect the system is, and I find it utterly unacceptable. Now, I could go on and tell you that it's cost $1 billion to pursue a death penalty in Pennsylvania, where there has not been an execution against the defendant's will since 1962. And I was born in 1961. That is a true fact. I could also tell you that of all these cases where a death penalty came down, and one of my predecessors got the death penalty about every 3 months for 19 years. I can also tell you that over about 3/4 of those death sentences got overturned by appellate courts because the defense attorneys didn't do the job. They were not paid to do the job. Nobody gave them the resources they needed because prosecutors lied, cheated, and stole to get the death penalty. I could tell you all about that. In Pennsylvania, it is really a penalty in name only, but it is still atrocious at many, 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 many different levels, including the level of what could $1 billion have done in our public school system. Answer, it could have prevented a lot of those homicides. That's what it could have done. So that is, it is a topic very close to my heart. That chapter lays it out. There's a lot of storytelling in the book because the conclusions I came to were not really, I'm not really an academic. They weren't the result of sitting and reading articles. These were conclusions that were based on being in court 4 to 5 days a week for 30 years, being a very, very active trial lawyer, and seeing what to me was kind of like a slow motion car crash developing, where the car just kept getting more and more squashed and more people kept flying out of doors and getting crushed. And that was what I experienced day after day after day, because you don't just do your own cases, you watch other people's cases. You watch judges giving people 10 times as much time in jail just because they tried their case. I mean, that's obscene, right? So there's a lot of storytelling. It's about those experiences, and it's about why I came to the opinions that I had at the time that I ran. And then, of course, the other main theme, in my opinion, aside from talking about my lovely wife, the other main theme, in my opinion, is getting the right people elected. How do you beat a mainstream party that is all about themselves and all about a flawed centrist view of how we get things done? How do you do that? It's in there. There are lists in there. One of the hilarious things about this book is it came out on the 20th of April, which was like, it was before the primary. And it basically talked about Philadelphia's party boss and how you beat him. Nobody in the Democratic Party read it. I don't want to say they can't read. I'm sure they can read, but you would think they'd pick it up. I mean, I don't know whether to be happy or sad, but they didn't pick it up. Well, that stuff is in there. And I do want to say this because I think this is really, really, really important. I'm not here to hate on John Kerry, but when John Kerry was 12 years old, he was looking in the mirror, whistling "Hail to the Chief." In fact, when he was in college, they used to whistle "Hail to the Chief" when he came in the room at 18 years of age, right? Secret. That's not who we want in politics. The people we want in politics are the ones who don't think of themselves quite so much, who don't think of their own ambitions, don't think of their own careers, don't imagine a life in politics. They're people who have been in public service and have turned themselves out in different ways for other people. We have a politics dominated by people who are, for the most part, megalomaniacs and are in no way driven by public service. And that means that your assignment and my assignment between now and January 1st, and I'm holding you to this, I'm going to call you, your assignment is to look around in your jurisdiction and say, who do I know who really should be a city council person or on the school board or should be the district attorney? Who is that scruffy ex-public defender who always wants to represent protesters for free and isn't exactly living in a mansion? Because that's probably the one who we want to talk to about running. They're not going to figure it out on their own. Somebody's got to come and say, hey, have you ever thought about this? And then when they say no the third time, you have to keep talking to them and you have to say, well, here's the news. You got some friends. There is this thing called a grassroots movement for criminal justice reform. There is this thing. We know people. They might like to talk to you. You should think about this. And if you do that, then this progress is going to go even faster. The problem we have all the time in Pennsylvania is when you talk to people in politics, when you talk to people in the media and you say, but who's going to run against that guy for Senate? They all say, well, let me go through my checklist of people who are already politically connected and have been elected twice. That's what they're going to do. Wrong. Was Donald Trump elected before that buffoon buffoon criminal became president of the United States? Was he elected to anything in his life? The answer is no. Neither was I, and I'm not Donald Trump, but neither was I. You know, an awful lot of these progressive prosecutors you're talking about, they were never elected to anything before they took these positions and won handily. That's a key ingredient that we should not ever minimize. There are probation officers out there. There are sheriffs out there who have law degrees, who understand this field and think right about it. They're not all a bunch of, play Southern sheriffs or play right-wing cops. They're not. There are police officers out there who think in very sophisticated and intelligent ways with a lot of experience on this stuff. And God knows that being a DA requires you to be a lawyer. So God knows there are plenty of lawyers out there who have worked their whole careers for the poor. Their whole book of business, as they say in the corporate firms, their whole life's work has been other people, and they've been good at it. And they're used to winning battles without having a lot of resources. That's exactly what you need for these positions. So that's your assignment. I appreciate that you have all nodded that you will do it. It is to go out and before New Year's, is to identify some people who really need to run and maybe even run in May. It is not too late. I didn't announce my campaign until 98 days before the election. That was the end of February. So think about it. It makes a huge difference. It's one thing to say, okay, here's one mediocre choice and two terrible ones. Woohoo! Let's vote for the mediocre one. It's another one to energize all those people alienated by politics by giving them a candidate whose life's work proves they're for real for the things they're talking about. And when you can energize in that way, you're going to get that turnout. You're going to get that votes. You're going to get those people coming out because they can believe that it's real.
Larry, you have to be peeking ahead in the chat because we actually have an audience question. You knew we were going to bring up candidates. So Karen Kane asks, what advice would you give to somebody that is looking to run as a progressive prosecutor for the first time?
I would say go to a bookstore and steal my book and look in there because you're going to need your money for the campaign. I would say that. I'm sorry, Penguin Random House, it slipped out. I would say that. I would say understand that there really are very substantial allies here. You should not be shy about reaching out to a leading progressive prosecutor who's not too far away. I mean, if you're in Illinois, I would definitely reach out to Kim Fox and talk to them. A lot of them will talk. I will talk to people who are interested in doing this, and I'll talk to you wherever you're from. You're from Arkansas, let's talk. I will do that. I would say do that. I would say you definitely want to contact the Working Families Party and say, hey, I'm here. Who do I need to talk to? You need to talk to Color of Change. Hey, I'm here. Who do I talk to? You need to talk to Bernie Sanders' organization. What is that? Our Revolution? You need to talk to that. You should talk to Local Progress. Whatever the leading obviously you're going to talk to, I don't know, you might talk to DSA. It just depends on where you are. And you're definitely going to talk to the wonderful organization that's being announced here today. But you need to talk to those folks because they know the people who work at this full time. You know, my campaign manager, and I write about him in the book as well, this guy named Brandon Evans. He is in many ways a prototype for the perfect campaign manager, even though he gives me a hard time. And that is that he comes from having seen the harm criminal justice can do in different ways. He comes from union organizing for a long time, just like Stacey Abrams did. And that then morphed into working for the Working Families Party, being the state director for Pennsylvania for working families. And because of his success in our campaign in 2017, progressing pretty quickly through various different names and various different entities to be a national political director, who essentially he goes to see Kim when she's up for re-election, and and gives the view from above. He may drop in for a while, and there's a whole group of people who are involved in helping around the country. And yes, they will help new candidates, new promising candidates who seem to have certain criteria met. I don't want to give away their secrets, but what are the criteria? Number one, you're for real. You have a life's work that shows something. If you're 2 days out of law school, no, you should actually have done a few things. You should have accomplished a few things. Congratulations on your ideals. We'll see you in 10 years. That's, I'm just being real. It doesn't work. People don't buy it. When you haven't done that much, you're only a few years out of law school and you're ready to leave. Sorry, millennials, but they just don't. So that's part of it. So you got to have a real life's work that is something you can talk about. Then they want to see that you can actually campaign like a real candidate. Do you have some capacity to raise some money? Do you have some friends? Have you helped people by representing them or by assisting their organizations or whatever it may be in a way that you can legitimately say, yes, I can raise, depends on the jurisdiction. Maybe it's 10 grand, maybe it's 250 grand, maybe it's $1 million, but I can raise a piece. Doesn't have to be the whole thing. It certainly doesn't have to be the most money. Even in 2017, the amount of money that we raised was middling in a group of 6-7 candidates. But you got to be able to raise something. And you have to be able to manage your end of a campaign. So if they, I had run a small law firm, very small, for 25 years, but they knew I'd run something. If they see the ability to manage a bit, the ability to campaign a bit, if they see that you're a realist about how you can raise some money, even though it's not a ton of money, and if they see that you're for real, that's kind of what they're looking for. What they're not looking for, here's a buffoon answer for you. What they're not looking for is, I don't really want this DA's thing. I just want to do it for a couple of years so I can run for attorney general. That is slap your knee and fall out of your chair. That is about as dumb an answer as you can get. Short of, what do I think of mass incarceration? Well, I'm not sure. That's also a really stupid answer. If you really are not down with progressive prosecution, then stop lying. If you really don't know these issues at all, why are you interviewing? You got to know something about it. Don't have to know everything. But other than that, this is not that special. In every jurisdiction, there are a lot of people who are good candidates, and there are very, very few who step up to do it because it's hard. And I could go into why it's hard. The book talks about why it's hard to be a criminal defense lawyer and take on your local prosecutor. Yeah, it is hard. But, for people who have sacrificed, who have been in public service, who've been trying to help others forever, we're really not all that worried about taking a few punches. We've been taking punches. Our clients have been taking punches. Some of us are born under punches. That's just how it is. We're willing to take those punches. And those are the right people. And the support that you will get if you take that risk, if you step out there, the support you will get, I think, will be far more than you might imagine.
Awesome. There's a few questions that we probably won't be able to get to because we are at time. We're about just a little over time. We do want to talk a little bit about our staff. The book again. Get the book. It's an amazing book. I do think it feels like a memoir to me. The stories in here are great, and the lessons are certainly out of this world. So please, please, please pick up the book. Link is in the chat. Join our book club. We do this fun thing 4 times a year with different amazing books by progressives. We're changing the world and have these conversations, and they're really helpful. We are very thoughtful about who we pick. And so I think we had an impressive year this year so far, and there is more to come. We also would love for you to support our work in Establish Justice, which is the new name for our criminal justice reform work. And that includes amazing DAs and prosecutors and AGs. And it also includes judges and other amazing people who are helping to establish justice in whatever form or fashion that they do through elected leadership. So please, please, please join us there as well. Chris, do you want to close us out and wrap us up? And certainly want to say thank you to our amazing speaker. We could go all night. Those of you who had those few questions, we will promise that we can get those to our amazing speaker. Would you be willing to respond to those maybe in writing?
I will be willing to respond probably by video because
Video, even better.
A lot quicker. But
Okay.
yeah, I will. We just have to get them to Jess Brand, Alex Fall, and we'll take care of it.
Perfect. Thank you. Chris, go ahead and take us out.
Well, once again, everybody, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you so much, DA Krasner, not only for your incredible work that you continue to do, but also taking the time to join us this evening. As Yvette said, if you haven't gotten the book, make sure you get the book, but also definitely be sure to support DFA's Establish Justice initiative. As DA Krasner said, there is some real momentum happening across this country, and people are seeing why it benefits to have more progressive prosecutors in these positions and just more progressive candidates in this position. But we don't get this work done without your support at the end of the day. So from me and the rest of the DFA family, thank you so much again for joining us tonight, and hopefully you have a good remaining night and a great rest of the week.
Molly, you want to put that playlist back to us to take us out?
Yeah, Philadelphia Freedom. There we go.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you.